Create and deploy full stack React application from scratch with continuous integration and continuous deployment setup and unit test. If this sounds interesting to you, continue watching. Hello everyone, welcome to FullStack JavaScript channel. In this video, we will be creating a full stack to-do application from scratch using ReactJS, Material for style, and we will also use Firebase to store the data. We'll use Firebase for authentication and host the application also. We'll have email-based authentication and Google login. We will also use Github Actions for the continuous integration and continuous deployment setup. We'll be learning about unit test, ESLint and Prettier setup, etc. Let's start creating. It's a long video as I included the complete process. Timestamps are added in the description, so you can skip to any particular interesting section. I've taken this challenge in Frontend Mentor. They have provided designs and style guide. There is a desktop design and mobile design also. To-do items are displayed in list. There is a filtering option on the bottom where we can filter by the completed status. We can delete the completed item using the clear completed button. And there are two themes also, dark theme and light theme. Now if you look at the demo application, so I've also added the authentication. So there is a Google login and email and password login. Once you log in, you can basically add the to-dos. If it is completed, it will show striked out, and once it is it will show how many items are left. We can also filter based on whether it is active or completed. We can remove all the completed items. We can also set a to-do as completed. We can delete a to-do, and we can change the theme light and dark, and we can log out also. If you look at all the features we'll be building, so we have authentication, where we have two types of authentication, email and password login, and also the Google login. We will have functionalities like add to do. We will also have to get all the to-dos for that particular logged in user. You also should be able to delete one to-do and also delete multiple to-dos. You should be able to also filter the to-dos based on active, all, or completed. And we should be able to change the theme, where we can show like light theme and dark theme. So these are the functionalities we want. And now if you look at that, it's basically a simple functionality. So we don't need a complicated multiple servers or anything. Let's say it's a simple, so we can just go with a single page application. So since we are already tried with Angular, this time we are going to try with the React. If you look at the technologies we are going to use, we'll be using React, and we'll use for authentication Firebase authentication, and for storing the data we'll use the Firestore, again from Firebase, and we'll use Material for the UI. We'll use create React app for setting up a React application. So starting this one is easy. We just have to run an npx command, which will basically create a basic folders for the React application, so that we don't have to do everything from the scratch. So we'll just name it as React Firebase to do, and then actually one more thing is we will utilize TypeScript here. So rather than just creating with the JavaScript, so better to use with the TypeScript. So let's try with that. Now this will install all the minimum things it requires, and so there is a lot of files hidden by the create React app. So we may not see all the configurations and all we are using, but internally it is using Webpack for setting up. Now we'll just try to start the application. We'll see the application will be running on localhost 3000. We can see that by default setup is running. Now let me open the application in the code. we'll be using ESLint for the code quality. Create React App is already having some ESLint setup. We can extend that. So if you look at the Create React App site, they are giving an option how do we extend the existing ESLint options. So we can create our own ESLint configuration and then we can extend the whatever Create React App is already using. So for that we will create an ESLint config file. We can also add more rules, whatever we want. In our case, we are using TypeScript. So we can utilize TypeScript ESLint rules also. So there is, if you look at the site TypeScript ESLint, so the suggested rules or ESLint parsers. So we'll install that. So this again into the ESLint RC.json, we'll be adding this parser and plugins and all. Also for the formatting, next thing is the code formatting. We are using Prettier. I've already installed the plugin. Even ESLint plugin is also installed. Now ESLint Prettier basically will format the code, add spacing or whatever the minimum formatting we need, and we can also set it up so that this is the default formatter. There can be different formatter, but we will set the Prettier as the default formatter, and we can also make sure that it is formatting on saving. Whenever we save the file, it will auto format. So we look at the settings, VS Code preferences. Let's try to see the current formatting. So we can also set that in the settings.json file. Directly we can modify it. So if you see here, I already added the default format as the Prettier VS Code, and then also we are saying on save we need to fix the ESLint and we need to format on save. All these settings I have added. Prettier also we can have our own Prettier configurations files. We have to also install the package. So that way for the project, everyone will be getting the same Prettier configurations. So we'll just continue with the setup. So here we'll just add the parser and plugin. So this is required so that the TypeScript is understood by ESLint. I'm just moving the single quotes to double quotes because it is JSON file and JSON file expects the string to be in double quotes. So these are the other ESLint rules which we are adding. Even we can have our own custom rules. If something is not there, we can even create our own custom rules. Now, since both ESLint and Prettier is there, there can be some conflicting rules also. So that is where there are some plugins and packages available for basically to make sure that there are no conflicts. So Prettier gives a lot of configuration options, how to add all those things it is given. They also have given the editor integration, how do we edit, and then the plugin instruction, and this is the same thing what we are seeing in the extension page. Now the ESLint config Prettier, this package we are installing so that there is no conflict between the ESLint rule, because ESLint rule also will say like how much spacing should be there. There can be rules like that. So we make sure that Prettier's configurations are not conflicting with the ESLint. Otherwise, it will be always a race condition. ESLint will complain, and then Prettier will complain back to back. Same, and the same goes for this plugin also. We'll need both things to make sure that there are no conflicting effects. We'll install both, and we'll also add it in our ESLint RC.json file. So now we have added the create React app recommendations, the ESLint recommendation, and TypeScript ESLint recommendation, and Prettier recommendations. Now we can create a Prettier configuration to add our own, what should be the Prettier rules, what we want to follow. So this one, if it is there, then this gets a prior preference over the other editor configuration, so that everyone working on this project will get the same rules, same formatting rules. Here also we can have different configurations can be added. You can also create a Prettier ignore. So in case if you don't want some files to be auto formatted, when we save the file, we can just include that in Prettier ignore, so that Prettier will simply ignore those files or folders. So by default, the compiled files, something which we are generating dynamically, don't need to be formatted. So that's the default one. We can add that. Like that, we can add any other files we don't want it to be auto formatted. We'll add some scripts also to run the ESLint, and also for even TypeScript or whatever. So all these validations we are adding, we'll just create some rules. So to run the ESLint, we can just simply say ESLint. Now, since the Prettier is there, now even if I, so let's say for example here I removed the semicolon, I saved it, it automatically added that again. TypeScript also will add. So we just have to set TSC without an emit. We don't need to emit the files. We don't need to generate any files. We just want to check whether there is any TypeScript error or not. So these are some checks we can do before we commit the code and all to the main, before we push to the main branch. We can test all these things. So our setup is now completed with ESLint and Prettier. Next we'll install Material. So Material, it's basically directly, we can just simply add as a, it's nothing but an npm package. Material has two types of style engines are there. By default, it uses the emotion as the style engine, or we can also use the style components also as the another option. We will just go with the default one, and Material by default uses the roboto font. So we'll just add that also in our index.html. Icons, if you want to use the Google font icons, Google icons, we can use the we can include that also, and that's it. So basically we have already added this one. We'll also add the theme setup and all, which we'll do a bit later, but just to add some functionalities, this is more than enough. So if we try with, let's say the button component, we can simply say import button from Material. So there can be two ways to import, either directly button from Material button, or we can use the basically this is actually a tree shaking we are utilizing. So we are just importing a named export, whatever named export from Material, we are using that. so that we don't have to every time say material slash then the name of the component. We can directly do both, will work fine. So tree shake, with the benefit of tree shaking, there won't be any extra code added. Either case is fine. Now that we added the component, you can see that the component now with some styles, and so by default it is giving the primary color, and it takes that, and then that's functionality is working. And adding the styled components, I mean there are two approaches of adding the styles. We can either add, there is an add property we can pass like SX as a property, using which we can have any custom properties and all we can add. Or if we use the style component, the approach will be like, we'll be creating a wrapper components with the styles and all. So both the options are possible. So this SX is a special property from the MaterialUI. So in the SX we can have, so if you see here, BG color is equal to background third page. So that color is something which comes from the default theme or from the theme which is added. So it is aware of the styles which Material is using. We will now add the routing for our application. We have two pages. We have login and the home page. We'll use React Router, now the latest 6.4 version is there. So to install the React Router, we just have to say React Router DOM. We have to install, and then the main thing is we need to add the browser router. So we'll install the package. Now if you look at the setup, first thing is we need the create browser router. We'll also do one thing, we have to create two pages, right? So we'll create components for that. Let's create a home page. And we are adding TSX because it's a TypeScript enabled file. So I'm adding an index.ts file, so that otherwise the URL will be like the path will be like component/homepage/homepage. So to avoid that extra path, we can just add it in the export from the index file. We'll just put some dummy text for now to verify that whether the setup is fine or not. Now we are exporting the homepage function from the homepage component. Same way, we'll just create another for the login page. We are just importing React also because without being React in the context, it will throw error, even though we are not directly utilizing any React method. Okay, now our app component will be the top level component. Within that, we want to render either home page or login page based on the URL. That's what the routing we want to do. We'll create a header for the top level section, which is common across both the things. So we don't want this to be different between the different pages. We have the top level theme switcher, and we want to show the login button and all. So we'll just create a header component which will just have these basic things. So the idea is that header component will directly use it in the app component, and after that the header, the content area should be dynamically filled by the current component, which is specific to that particular route. Now the thing is, we need for the routing, how do we set up the routing? So if you look at the routing, how do we set up is, it starts with a router provider and we need to create a browser router random. So we'll put it as a we'll create a folder providers, and under that we'll create anything like this. So providers and context is something we can use to pass the data across the application. So on top of the router provider, we'll create our own custom router. So here we are creating the browser router, and so this is the top level path we are giving. What we'll give is, we'll make app component as the top level component, and the login and homepage component as our child components. There is a lot of similarity between how the routing setup is added in Angular and React now. So we'll follow the same thing. So app component top level, and then after that we'll just, it's the same thing, we'll just add the path and element. That's it. In our case there are two paths. First one is basically the same thing, like we need the same slash basically the home page, where we need to add the home page component. Now it's a hierarchy we have created. Now with this one, what we'll do is we'll create the router provider. So the router provider doesn't have to wrap the other things, so we'll just simply return the app router provider. From that we'll just simply return the router provider with our router what we created. Now we'll pass it. So in this way, the app router, the routing details are all in a single file, and the index.tsx is more cleaner. So we're just adding only the app router provider. So everything is utilizing in that way. Now, how do we display the content inside the app component? So that is where there is an outlet option. So that the outlet is the one where we tell the where to display the child component, child route component. So as per the current route, this child component will be rendered. We'll also add a link on the header, link to the login page. So in our case, it's a very static page. We just have to static URL is just a /login, and then we'll just redirect to the login. Now if you look at this one, login, if you go, you can see there is a login page is showing and home page. So the top level section is not changing, only the content area is changing. Let's go to the Firebase console. So I logged in as a go with the Google login. We can click on add new project. Let's give some name, React Firebase Todo. Continue, and we don't need analytics, and then it will create the project. While it's creating, we'll also install the Firebase npm package. This is the one which we'll be using to communicate with the Firebase. So we'll just install the Firebase. And it has an initialize app. This is the one which we should start with. So now the project is created. So there are three types of apps possible: iOS, Android, and web. We'll be creating a web app. So now this will generate a Firebase configuration. That is the one we need. We already installed the Firebase. So we'll just copy the Firebase configuration, and then so this we need to initialize as soon as the application is loaded, because all our functionality is dependent on Firebase. Now we need to enable authentication as well as the Firestore. So for authentication, there are multiple providers are available. In our application, we'll be going with Google. I'll just use one default email. Also, we'll use the email and password login also. There are a lot of providers given by Firebase. So that's it. So now that we have enabled the authentication, now we'll create a Firestore. Basically, this is where we'll be creating the database for the storing our data. We'll just go with the test one. So that means it won't have much protection. Anyone can access the database. This can be changed later to the production mode. So we cannot directly access the DB. Okay, now this store is created. We can create collection. Collection is a list of documents. In our case, we need a Todos collection. And ID is an automated one. Title, it can be string. So this one will be displaying as a to text. We also want to have a Boolean flag to check whether the to do is completed or not. And we also needs to store the current user ID. We need to associate each to do with a user. So now we have the data. Now we can try to utilize this in our application. So now we already initialized the application. Now we can store this. So now here is where we have initialized the application. But now what we need is we need to pass this to everywhere. Everyone should be able to, every component should be able to access it. So we need to get the database instance first. For that, the get Firestore method we are using. Also, we will export this DB so that it is available in every component. Now we need to also add this Firebase in the top level. So now that we are exporting the DB from the Firebase to TS, we can import that. So we are calling the collection from the DB and the collection name is Todos. And this we will call when the page is loaded. So we just have to call it only one time. In this case, we want to load as soon as the page is loaded, we want to call this one. So we can utilize the use effect without a dependency, so that it will act like it will only call it one time. We will also need to have some state to store this to-dos. So we'll utilize the use state, and initially there is no value, so we'll just so the document data is the type it is returning. Document dot data method is returning document data, so either that or a null is what we will be getting. Null is a default value, or if there is no data, we'll be getting. And then we'll utilize the set todos function so that it is setting that. Now we can read this data in our component. You can see learning React is actually showing, so that means we are getting the data now. Yeah, so start learning React is coming from the to do. So yes, so we are able to get the data. Now let's try to update. So is it a live update or not? That is what we wanted to see. Now if you see the data what we updated in the database, it's not updating here. But if I refresh the page, yes, now we are getting the data. That is because we are just calling this only one time. When the page is loading, we are calling, and then we are not listening for it. If you want to continuously listen for the changes, then there are other methods. So let's look at the other different methods available. If you look at the documentation, so get data, get real data, real time updates, this is what we're. So there is a method called on snapshot. This basically is like a callback, and which will keep getting executed whenever there is a change in the value. So we can utilize that so that whenever there is a change directly in the database, we'll still be able to get the update. So it will be a live update. But in this case, we need all the documents. So the example they have given is just one document, right? So instead we want all the data. So let's look at an example where they are getting a collection. So here if you see, they are getting a collection by calling a query. So we can utilize this one. First we need a query, and this query we can add where condition also, but for now let's just get all the data. So from the query we'll first add the import, and Todos is the collection we want, and from there where condition we'll remove for now, and then we will call the query snapshot, and then we'll be getting the Todos. So query snapshot gives us a list of all the documents. So what we can do is we can just create a list of to-dos, and then we can finally, once we added all the to-dos, then we will just assign that to the to-dos state. So we'll read all the data. So we'll use the doc.data, and we can give the type also. If you look at the type, it's given basically is a document data. So we can just give that as a type. So we'll initialize this as a type of document data, so that TypeScript won't complain later when we try to insert a document data to the array. Now let's try to see whether we are able to get the updates or not. So we are getting the data now. Now let's try to update that from the database and see if you are able to get the changes. So now I put it back to start learning React, and you can see that it came here without I am refreshing the page. Let's even try to add a new document. Now if you look at the page, again that also is showing up here. So it's a span, so it shows in a one line. That will fix that, but you can see that both the data is coming. So that means our Firebase setup, we are able to read the data from Firebase successfully. We have two types of login we want to implement. One is the Google one, and one is the email and password. We already enabled this providers in Firebase. Now we have to integrate the same in our React application. Now in our documentation, if you look at, let's look at first how the Google login is implemented. So if you look at the Google documentation, let's see. So they are importing the Google Auth Provider, and then the functionality basically sign in with pop-up. So a pop-up modal will be showing up. So we'll first import this Google Auth Provider, and we'll create a provider instance. Now we'll just copy this whole function. So what it's doing, it's collecting the auth information, and then it is opening a pop-up. From there we can get the Google login. Once the Google login is completed, we will be redirected, or the pop-up will be closed, and then we will be getting the user details, and these details are available as a promise. Let's also create a state to hold the user. So just simply a use state we'll use just to store that information, so that we can see that data, whether we logged in successfully or not. Now the type will be, there is a user type is there, so Firebase.user. So initially, since we are initializing with the null, we'll just set it as type as user or null, and then finally we'll set the user when we get the data. And if it is an error, we'll just simply console.log it. Now let's add some button just to try it out, because we need to have some action to trigger that. So we'll just create a simple button which will trigger this function. So on click of that, we'll just call this method, and once we get the user, we'll just display that also. Okay, now let's try it out. Let's see how it is. So we have the, if you go to the login page, we have the login button. We'll click on that, pop-up is opening since I am already logged in this browser tab, and we are getting the name also. So the Google functionality, login functionality is working fine. Now we'll add the email and password based login. So email and password based login means we need two text fields, one for email and one for password, and also we need button as well. So the text field can be a controlled component or an uncontrolled component. A control component means we are controlling the value using the state. So we'll set the value, and every time the value is changing, we'll use the onChange to set the value. So we have more control on that, or it can be even used as a simple text field, and we can just listen for the change event. Even there are other options MaterialUI is providing, is we can wrap it inside a form control component and then get the form state also. So like I said, since it can be like two ways, we'll just use with the simple format. We'll just use the use state to set one for email, one to store the password. Password is of type password, otherwise it will be visible whatever text we are adding. Now it's giving a type error because actually the on change is an which gives a type of event. So the set email is expecting a string value because email is of type string, right? So we need to create a function which will take the event, and from that event.target value is what we really want. So the type, if you look at here, it is mentioned like React.change event of then the change input element. So we'll just use the same thing. That is from change event is from React, so we'll just import that from the React. Now event.target.value we can try to get, and we'll see. What we need now is to see how we can add that or do the sign up and sign in Firebase. So there is a create user with email and password, so we can use that method. So we already have the auth, so we can say auth.create. Just create user with email and password and passing the auth and email and password. And once we are logged in, we can again do the same. So we can set the user. Sign with email and password expected 0 but code 3. Sign in with email and password. Okay, one issue I am seeing is it's not importing. Whatever I am importing is not what I am using because of the color you can see. Okay, so the method name and this one both are same. We have our custom method also. I'll just change it to a different name so that it is different, and then I'll call that. Okay, now there is no error and we can see email and password. Let's create a user. So I'm just creating trial@gmail.com, so and some password I'll use. Let's do a sign up. Now the sign up is done. We didn't get any error, so it won't display the display name because there is no display name we are setting for this user. But what we can do is we can check whether the user is getting created or not. Let's try in the Firebase whether the user is created or not. Okay, now we can see that the user trial@gmail.com is created. Is that login working is what we need to see. Okay, I put the breakpoint in the wrong place. Let's put a breakpoint here and see. Okay, now we are getting the user. That means we are able to log in successfully. So the email and password login is working and the Google login is also working fine. Now that we have implemented the login, we need to have a mechanism to share this user information across the application. We need it in the login page. From the login page we will be getting, and then we need in the home page, header, multiple places we'll need. So what is the best way to share the data across the application? So we'll use the context and provider. So we'll create another auth provider here. So what we'll do is we'll create a context, and in that context we'll have two things. Basically, one is the current user and one is to have a method to set the current user. So it can be a user or it can be null also, because we are initializing with a null value. Same way, set user will just have a method so that from the login and on you can set this value. Initially, even this also we don't have any value initially. So we'll just for the initialization purpose, so maybe we can give a null. It can be a nullable field for this also. Now let's create the context. So using the create context, and we'll provide this type, auth context type. And we'll say user will initialize with a null. And the method, like I mentioned, so we can, so right now we just, so it is expecting a function. So we don't have any function. So we'll just initialize with a null value. So let's add the nullability. If I add this like a empty function, then the ESLint will start complaining. So we cannot create just a empty function, or we can remove this role also, ESLint rule that we don't want in this way, or for now we can just set this as null. Now we'll create a custom component which will be nothing but a provider, which returns basically the auth context provider. So this will be just so that the parent application, the top level component, we will wrap it inside this auth provider, so that any value the top level context is getting, every child component will be able to read that value. And we will give that type as it's a functional component of type this particular props. We are just expecting only React, any React component is what we are expecting. So that's what props as children we are given. And we will create the auth context provider. And whatever is the React children component we are getting, we'll just put it inside it. Now we'll use the use state to get the value. So same thing what we did in the login component. Now just that we are moving that way context. Now one more thing we can do is we could also store this user information in a session storage or local storage somewhere to persist this information, so that even when we refresh the page, we will not be losing that information. Let's create the set option. So what we'll do is, in the setting to the storage, okay, so we'll create a sign out also. So in the sign out, we'll just it will begin a function which we will initially enable with a null. So we'll give the same thing. It is a function so that we can remove anything what we are storing. So on setting the storage, what we'll do is we'll store the user information to the session storage, and on remove, we'll just remove from the session storage. So we will expect that we'll be getting a user of type Firebase user, and that is what we are going to set it here. So since it is an object, we will stringify it. Now we'll create a get from storage. So this is the one we'll be using when the page is loaded. First time we'll be reading from the storage and see whether if it is having any value or not. After that, since we are setting to the use state, so we don't need the storage, but first time when the page is loading, we'll need to read from the session storage. If it is already there, then we need to parse this data from a string to an object. So we'll use the JSON parse. And this function will call in our use state as an initial value, so that it is not always initialized as a null. Instead, we will, if it is local session storage has a value, we'll initialize the state with that. Now we'll have a remove also. Remove is again a simple one. We'll just remove it from the session storage. Now the set user, we are so we'll setting the user, and then finally we will just create a value and we'll pass it as a auth context provider value. Now this value we provide, and in the inside that we will be entering the whatever is the children component. Now this auth provider, we have to put it in the top level so that every component in the application has access to the user and set user properties of the context. So in the index component, which is a top level component, we will take this auth provider and then we will wrap the whole app router provider inside that. So basically the whole application is rendering inside that. Now how do we set the value? How do we utilize this one? So in our home page, if you want to use, so anywhere we want to use, we will be using the use context and we will be providing the context what we want to give. So we are able to use that because we added that provider on the top. So we are calling the use context of React, and then we are passing the auth context. We were not exporting, so we'll just export that, then we'll be getting the import. We can import from there. Now the auth context, the value what we provided is, we can get the user, we can get set user. In our case, what we want is, we want the user. Now, why do we need this user? Because we want to query based on the particular user. Now we need to first set the user, then only we'll be able to get the user. So setting the user means we'll be getting the user information and the login. So we'll utilize that. So whenever we get the user, we'll use this set user. Internally, the context is using the state itself. So we don't need this anymore. So wherever we are already doing the set user. So this is already there, and then we'll be getting the other user information also. Now since we are setting the user, now in our home component, we can get that user. Now in the Firestore, we have the option we can pass a query with a where condition. Let's look at the documentation, how it is being added. So if you look at the documentation where we are reading the data and we are reading the real-time updates, let's look at the queries in that. So if you see here, there is a where condition we can add. We can even have multiple where condition. In the where condition, in our case, what we want is, we want the to-dos only for the current user. So let's import the where, and in our case, the where condition is, we want only the user ID. That user ID is equal to the user, the current user dot ID. Okay, so it is providing the UID as per the Firebase user type. So we'll get that. If you try to add if there is no user, if you try to return the null, so it will not try to execute the remaining, but this will throw an error because the use effect is a hook. So any hooks you cannot run conditionally. If you add a condition like that, use effect may or may not run. So that TypeScript won't allow, because as per TypeScript logic, every hook has to be run. I think the bracket was already in the wrong. Okay, now let's look at the application, if you are getting it or not. We are getting some error because auth context we didn't import. Now the page is loading and then it is saying set user is probably null. So set user function we created, we given the type as either it can be null also. We can add one thing is, we'll just add a null check, so that to make sure that the still it is complaining because it's not just user, set user also can be null. So we'll add the condition for set user also. So we'll add this condition, so user and set user. So both if has value, then only we are calling that method. Now let's try to see if it is working fine or not. I think it gave an error on the, maybe we'll just try to refresh and see if it is working. Yeah, so we logged in. Now we are able to get the wages, get the data. Now if you go to the home page, we are not getting any data, which is correct because this is a new user and we haven't created any to do with this user. Now we need to add the to-do for this user to see the data. Even the user information is stored in the session store if we look at that. Now we will look into how we can add the to-dos. First we will create the component for adding the to-do, and we will add that to the home page component. So let's create the component the same way how we created the other components. We'll create an add to-do folder, and then we'll create an add to-do tsx file. It will be a simple functional component. So now let's just start some dummy text, and then we'll export the same from our index.ts file. Now let's add the same in our home page. Currently we are just simply displaying only the to-do items. We have to improve the layout. We'll do that in soon, and we'll just within this team we'll just add the add to do component, so that now as soon as it is added, we should be able to see the updated added to dos in the page. So as per the layout, the add to do is in one card or one box actually, and the list of to dos are in another box or card. So we'll import the card component, and there are like card action, card content, all these are available. We'll put all the buttons inside the card action and all the other content inside the card content. So basically our to-dos will go to the card content, and we have some filtering also needs to be done, that will go to the card actions. Now we will create another card in the add to do. The same thing we will do. So we'll create a card, and then card content. Inside the card content, we'll add our text field for entering the to do. Let's look at text field, how we are adding. So what we are adding as a label will act as a placeholder, and on select of that it will basically shift up. We also need to show a radio button on the left side as per the design. So it looks similar to this one. For now we'll just use the same icon just to be easy to set up. Later we'll add our own custom icons. So on these examples, I think the last one makes more sense, because we don't need the text field anything other than. So it should be outside the icon. So icon should not be part of that text field. So I think it matches with the third one. So the box is like a custom component given from MaterialUI. So we can add any, it will basically by default add a div element, but we can even change it to any other component. So we can add the SX property. So in that we can have our own custom styles. Any styles we want to attach, we can add that. So so we are in this example we are utilizing from MaterialUI icons material, but the package is not there in our application. So we have to install that first. Once it is installed, we can use any of these icons. Later we will change this to our own custom icons. Same like how we did in the login component, we'll just we'll make it as a controlled component. So we'll create a state value just to hold the current value of the input. The only difference is the event we want to listen to. This time we want to listen for the key press event. So whenever the user press enter, that is when we want to add a to do. So there is no key press event, looks like. Oh yes, we can add that. Okay. So here, if it is an ender, so ender has actually event.key. If you look at it, will give it as ender itself. So there are some named keys. So otherwise, all other key numbers and all it has some ASCII code. But for the some named keys are there like shift, enter, control and all. You can exactly check whether if it is enter or not. So key press event looks like it's not working. There is nothing like key press event, but it seems like we can use the keyboard event. Event.target.value, it's throwing error. Let's first try to just print the event.target. It's giving error. Maybe I'll just try to restart. Once you restart, I am getting some error on report web title. This looks like some ESLint error. Let's open it and see. So once I open and saved it, it automatically formatted because of Prettier. Now there is no issues found. We are able to see the text build also. Now we need to add an icon. So we need a radio button. Unchecked radio button is what we want to show on the side. That is as per our design. So if you look at the radio button, there is one radio button unchecked icon. So we can take this icon. Now if I press enter, is it coming up or not? We'll look into that. Let's put a breakpoint and see. I'm pressing enter, it's coming here, and event.key. Which is set in an event.key, it's enter, but I think E is capital. So we'll give the same thing. So now we can get the event.target.value. But when you are putting this directly, it will throw error. So we need to typecast it to the HTML input element, and then we can use the dot value. Now let's try. We'll try to enter something and press enter, and then we can see the data is coming. Now we are ready to insert this data into the Firestore. So if you look at the Firestore documentation, add data. So adding the data, there are multiple set doc option is there. But to do the set doc, you need to know already. So that is for updating the data and all. What we need here is we need to create completely new data without knowing an ID. So there is an add doc method is available. We can utilize that. So it is expecting that we need to pass a DB and we need to pass a collection name. So now we have the DB and Todos is the collection. What we want to enter is for the title, we want to pass whatever is the input value. And when we create something, it is completed is false. We also need to pass the user ID. And how do we get the user ID? So we have the auth context available. So use context is from React, auth context is from our own custom context. So the user has a UID and user is optional, it can be null also, so we'll put an optional chain. So you can see that as soon as I enter, it came down also. So that means it added to the Firebase. Since the home page has a value changes option is there, it actually gets the data immediately also. The snapshot is immediately watching for that. So we added two, hi and hello, and both are displaying here. So that means add functionality is working fine. Till now we used the default theme of MaterialUI, but in our application we need custom themes. So we'll see how do we create the theme. So MaterialUI has an option of create theme where we can define what is our main color. So different color themes we need to just provide. Whatever we want to override, we can override that. So a theme palette has a different option, primary, secondary. We can provide for warning, for backgrounds. For each option we can actually provide some values. So we'll just create a very minimum level custom theme. So we'll create a file for theme. So we are utilizing the create theme method from MaterialUI. So in our application we have a light theme and a dark theme. For now we'll just go with the one theme. Later we'll add multiple themes and all. So like I said earlier, so we need to at least have a primary color. So we can define what should be the primary color. We can give our own custom colors with some hex values and all, or we can use any of the colors from Material, and it has a different shades, so we can use any of that. So in this example, so it is taken from MaterialUI colors green and purple. So if you look at the material colors, there are a lot of colors are there, like amber, blue gray, like a lot of colors are there. So we can, and then from that the shade is what the number refers to. So we can try with the different colors and see what is matching with us and what we want, and then we can use that. A dark theme will just create a mode as dark. So with that, adding that extra mode, automatically the default some styles will change to the dark. Like for example, the text colors or the background colors, it will become dark. By default it is white, and we can again give whatever colors we want. We can define that also. We'll create an enum to store this theme information so that it can be passed later. We'll be using this to pass across the application what is the current theme, because based on the theme we have to do different activities, or we have to show different data. I'm just creating this object to map this so that we can have a function which will return this particular theme palette, and that we can use in our theme provider. So we'll follow the same approach what we did for the auth. We will store the theme, we'll create a context, and we'll have a setter option, we'll have a getter option, and also we will store the theme. We'll persist the theme using some session storage. So let's add the type also. So for this theme context type, we'll be needing one information is we will need the theme itself. What is the current theme? So that will be of type the theme, which is the theme enum we created. So let's import that also from the theme file. And we should have a setter method which will accept a theme . I'm setting it as a null also as an option so that I can set the initial value as null. So by default we will just set it the theme as light theme will set as a default one, so that it will always have a value. So that's why in the type I did mention it as null also as a type. I will create the theme provider, and the type also we are creating a functional component type, and we will define the props. Here also the same thing, we are just expecting only the children, which is of type React node. So getting the current theme, so we are just reading from so we assume that we are going to store this in the session storage. So if it is already there, we'll just read from the session storage. If not, by default we will give the light theme as the value. Now this is the one we are going to use in our use state. You don't even need the null actually, because we always will have a value. Now the problem here comes is like the session storage.get item is giving a string or a null value, so the type is not matching. So we'll make it as a ternary condition. If it is already there, then we'll just convert the session storage value to as a type theme. Now we'll create the set theme, which we are going to expose using the context, which internally we'll call the first is we'll add to the session storage, then also we'll set that to the state. Same like how we did for the Auth Provider. So we'll be rendering the children inside this one, and this we will add it to the top level so that the theme information is available across the application. Now to pass this theme information to the material, material has its own theme provider is there. That is how material is able to understand about the current theme across the application. So if you look at this one, this is one example where they are using this theme provider. Let's import the theme provider, and then so we will add this also inside our app theme provider. So now both these providers are available, so we can get values using both. One for utilizing in the MaterialUI, one for any our custom logic related to the theme in our application. So whatever is active theme currently is what we are going to get set to this theme. Okay, now we have set both providers, our custom one and also the MaterialUI one. Let's try to add the color and let's see whether the theme is getting applied or not. So we'll set the color as primary, and let's see whether the colors are changing. So the color is purple. This is what we have given. If we look at the secondary, now the color is changing. Now let's make the default theme as dark one, so that we can see how it looks like in the dark mode. It actually didn't make any change. but it should be. I think it's because we don't have any base styles being added. So that is where we'll be using the CSS baseline. CSS baseline adds some kind of a basic styles so that it will have that consistent Material UI layout. It is similar to a reset CSS or a normalized CSS we used to do. So we just have to add that above our current application. So we can just add that as a above our routing provider. Now you can see when we add the dark theme as a default, now that style by default, the dark being the background and all is being added. If you set the light theme, it will go back to the normal one. Whatever is the primary or secondary way given, based on that the colors will add up. Let's look at the design, how we want to layout. So currently we haven't added any styles. So if you look at the design, the desktop view, the content is only on the center. We are not taking up the whole space. And if you look at the mobile design, it takes up the whole space. It just some padding is on the sides. So that is one layout, and we'll also try to add some other extra other styles also. So in Material UI, to create the responsive UI, we can first start with a container component. So which is a very responsive way. It will create a responsive UI. So we'll just change the div with the container, which internally again is a div only to add, but with some style. It gives an option. We can define different styles like max width or what should be the width. Is it a fluid, means very responsive, it will automatically adjust to the width. So it has the max width, and we can mention whether we want SM or XS, all those different breakpoints we can define. Now it's only on the center. If you look at the mobile design, it takes up the whole space. Otherwise, it takes up like only this much width, the remaining is this width. In the mobile view, it is taking the whole space. So this is what we want actually, with some padding is also there. Now we will add the background image. I have already copied the images to the images folder under SRC, and we want to add the background image to the top level element. So it is basically covering the whole area. Right, so that we cannot put it in the container element, or because container is taking up only the center area. We want the whole thing. So we'll add it in the root element. So I'll add it in the top level style, which is index.css. And in create React app, we can just import the same like any other files. File import is provided here. So we can just pass whatever is the image bar, we can give that, and we don't need to repeat also. Now we are getting the style here. Now if you look at the layout for the header, in the header we have on the top level we have the login, which we want, maybe we can put it on the right side. So the grid automatically, if you put a grid and it is a container, it has a flex system display flex, and we can add attribute also what kind of alignment we want. So in our case we want it to be on the rightmost, so we can just simply say justify content right. So now we are seeing the login button is showing on the top right. Next we have the left side, we have the header, and the right side we have the theme switcher. So there are two items now inside this. So we can have a grid inside grid, whether one grid is a container and one grid inside one is an item. and we can give a justify containers the space between, because one we want on the leftmost and one we want on the rightmost. So we are here we have one is we just want to add a header, and second one is we want to add a button. What we want as in button is we just want to show an icon, a theme icon, and that should be clickable. So in the button we look at the different variations. There is an icon button option is there, so we can utilize that. The icon button we can pass a particular icon we want to show, and then we can pass that. For now we'll just use any icon. Later we can change this one. In this example it's showing a camera. Let's use that one for now. Now we have the header on the left side and the theme switcher on the right side. We can add some spacing, so the system property gives options like margin out, margin right, short forms are given actually. So to give the spacing, like directly we can just say margin top is equal to, like that we can give, or we can add it in the SX attribute property and then we can pass the same thing. Now there are some spacing is there between. So margin top, MT is a short form of margin top. And it will just take place of, by default one is as 8 pixel, so that's why when we give 5 it becomes 40. And we'll be putting a margin bottom, so MB is a short form. Now we need to also style the login page. The login page, the text fields are in the same line, so we need to fix that, and then we need to change the coloring a little bit. We need to make it like a card, so we can make it similar to the R2Do. In R2Do we created the card, same like that we can wrap the login form fields inside a card. So what we need is card component and card actions and also the card content. Let's utilize the card and card content. Same component we'll add it in the login component also. We'll add the card and we'll put all these text fields inside the card content. And all these buttons we can put it inside the card actions. We don't need to display this user anymore. As per the layout also we don't need that. Now if you look at this one, this looks as within a box. One issue is both are in the same line. And the button showing bottom, so I think that is good. Now how do we make it like the text box is taking the full width. So text field has a full width attribute is there. If you pass that, it will automatically take up the full width. So we don't need to add any special style for that. Okay, now it is already taken, but now we need some kind of a spacing in between the text boxes. So again, for each item we can have give the styles, and we can specify. So what all custom styles are there? So that's what if you look at the system properties, right? So there is, all these are custom styles. Custom style means these are all some shortcuts or short forms we can utilize, and we can use. So these are all MaterialUI specific ones. So here we are saying, if I add a margin button, now we can see that for this text box there is a margin button. Same thing we can add for the next one also. So if I want for this each text field a margin button, either I need to repeat that for both text field, or I need to create a wrapper component on top of text field, or we can also add the styles on the parent level component. So when we override any styles, default styles using CSS, we need to look at the CSS class of that particular component. So in our case, ampersandage, which refers to the card content. Inside that, this text fields. For each text field, we want to add a margin bottom of 2. So since it is within the SX attribute, that's why it is able to understand all these properties like MB or all these shortcuts. It's able to understand. We have different background images for different breakpoint. For mobile there is a different image, and for desktop there is a different image. We also have different image for the different themes that we'll do later. So in this case, we'll add a media query where we'll add a mic suit. So as per our style guide, we have got the mic suit as 375 pixel. So if the width is within 375 pixel, then we will give a different background image. Which is basically BG Mobile Lite. Now the image looks similar, but if we inspect this one, we can see that now the first one, which is under the media query, got the preference. Let's fix the layout for the home page. So in the home page, we need to have the add to do box, and this one there should be some gap in between. So we'll add some margin top. So now there is a gap here. Now for each to do item, now we are just displaying in a single line. We need to change that to one by one as a list item. So we can utilize the list component, and within list component we can have each list item. So there are different variations of list component we can see here. We'll just simply use a simple one. Let's copy the list and list item imports. So what we'll do is, for each item, a to-do item, so to do all the to-do items, we will wrap it inside the list items, and each to-do will become a list item. So the list, we'll wrap it inside the list, and then each to do item will become a list item. So since it's a list of all the item, we'll put it inside the map function, which will return this list item, and we'll move it inside the list. We also needs to have a radio button on the left side, and the whole row should be selectable. So we'll take the list item button, and we can add the one for the text and one for the icon. Sorry, we don't need an icon, we need the radio button. Now if you look at it, both are in the same different lines, but there is some extra spacing on the right. So there is an attribute given disable padding. If you take that, now the padding is reduced, but still there is a gap. From where that gap is coming from? That seems to be coming from a parent level component. But let's try it out. Let's try to remove all padding. We can even just say p:0. We don't even need to write complete padding. So I tried the padding and margin both are 0, but still that doesn't fix that complete spacing. So it seems to be coming from the card content. So card content, if you look at the style, there is a 16 pixel, padding is 100. So I'll put the padding as 0 there. Now there is no gap of that, so it is taking up the whole space. Now we need to have a border bottom for each list item. We need to display a line after each list item. Now for the color, we can use different colors. We can just hardcode whatever is the value we want to give. We'll give some light gray color, and I think this looks fine. Even we can use the theme, from the theme also we can use. Now we'll go back to the MaterialUI components. We'll look at the radio button. So in the radio button, what we want is, we just want a single radio button. On click of that, or on check of that one, we want to set the to do as completed. So by wrapping inside a form control and all, what we'll be getting is, we'll be getting form values. So basically whatever is the latest value, current value, we can even get using the hooks and all. So there is a lot of options provided like that by Material. In our case, we want a very simple one. Look at the example of the standalone radio button. So we can just utilize the on change event, and we can pass value, and we can use the check to attribute. That's the only thing we need. So same thing, we'll just creating the radio, and we want to pass what is the, whether it is checked or not. If it is checked means whether the current to do, if it is completed, it is checked. And I will create a handle change method. On that we'll pass the current to do. We'll just create a dummy function for now. We'll just and whatever we are getting the to do, current to do will be getting. We'll also add a model we'll create so that we can, instead of just saying it is a document data, which is a very generic one, we can specify that we are going to get the to do items, each one is of type to do, which will give us more TypeScript validation. Basically we are utilizing the features of TypeScript. So we are creating a custom type here. Title is the string, is completed, it's a boolean, user ID is a string. So we can say it is of type to do. We need to update the same in everywhere. Here we'll do a typecasting to convert it as a to do. Okay, so the value we are not interested in. Name also we are not interested in that. Array level we can add, which is good for accessibility. Now for each item there is a radio button is also being shown. And whenever we click on that, we are able to get the details. Now if you look at the footer part of it, we need to have the buttons, we need to have how many items left text, also we need to have the final button to clear all completed button. So we can use the grid here also for aligning these items. We'll import the grid component and then we'll use that. So like I said earlier, grid creates a flex box, so it will be easy for us to align the items. So it should be a container because we are adding multiple items, and only for container it is adding the display flex. We don't need that flex direction because by default it is going to be like this. We don't want the column actually. We want, by default we want the row only, because everything we want to be in the same row. All the filter buttons we want, we need to have an all button, we need to have an active and completed. So there are 3 buttons we need. So we are putting a one container grid inside another grid. We again need another button for the clear completed. For adding that, showing that text, we can just simply say, we could just simply put span also. What is the benefit of adding a box component? And from there we can convert into any component is, we can pass the SX property so that we will get the custom style attributes of the system properties provided by the material. By default, box will make it as a div. So if you look at this one, the first one, card action, so we are adding flex direction row. So it has a width of 100%, which takes up the whole space. So we don't need, so we want it to be an item. Since it is a button, still it is on single line. But since we want to utilize the flexbox switches, we'll make it as a container also. But if you use the container, then it's using it as a 100%. So instead we'll use just a simple or on custom flexbox. We'll make it as a box, a simple div, and we can make it as display flex. We'll add the justify content and align items to be, it's not align content, align items will add so that it is vertically centered, and also the justify content space between we are using so that every item has a space in between. Now instead of making it as a span, we can just say box component equals span. So finally it will be still a span, and we can have our own, we can pass our own custom styles also, material specific styles also. Now we'll add the styling for the filter buttons. So if you look at the design, filter buttons has a default text styling. Only the selected item has a different color. So when we look at the coloring, so we can utilize the color from the theme itself. So it default gives some properties, whatever, all these properties from, we can utilize the material color which is coming from the theme, which is coming from the color palette of the theme. We can use the primary, text.primary, primary.main, all these different colors, color names we can utilize. If you want a gray color, it has different shades are there, or primary, it has different shades like that. So we can use, so we'll use a text.secondary here, and it will look like a normal text color. We can play around with it and we can add different, all these kind of values we can utilize. Now what we want is, when it is active, we want to have a different color. Otherwise, we will have the default color. So we want a dynamic color. So, and this behavior we want for all the buttons. So rather than repeating this, conditionally adding some classes and all or style colors, we'll create a wrapper component so that we don't have to repeat this again and again. So we'll create a new component which internally will use the button. Now we'll just copy the same thing. What we created, the same thing we'll do. So we'll create a button and then we'll add this color. Now we'll have some property to check or know whether this button is currently active or not. And if it is currently active, that is when we want to give a different color. Otherwise, we'll just give the default color, which is the text.secondary. Let's add a custom type also for the component. This is the same like how when we created the providers. It is just expecting a children, which is basically we are wrapping this inside this component and then we are adding. So this way we are making it reusable. Otherwise we cannot have different content inside that button. So we'll use the destructuring to read the isActive from the props. Now instead of using this button, everywhere we can change it to the new button component which we created, so that we don't have to repeat the styling. It gives error void is not assignable. Okay, so we haven't added the isActive as a boolean, but I haven't given a default value. So that means it is a mandatory one. We'll try to add a default value. So based on this, so we should not add that here isActive. So I'll put this as a default value in the destructuring part. That's the correct syntax. Now based on if it is active, then I will add a different color. I think this is Firebase throwing some error. When we refresh, I think that's gone. All are now showing the default color. We'll add the same for clear button also, so everything follows the same structure. Now let's try to make one as active. So we'll just pass isActive property, so it will be by default, so it will become true. Now if it is true, we want to add some other color, so we can just use maybe some other, so we want some kind of a blue color in the active item. So we can see, we can take some of this from the palette, any one of the colors. We can maybe take from the info, it seems a little bit of blue, so we can try to use that. Now the active one has a blue color. Now this we will do it dynamically later, but as per the styling, I think this is what we want. Now in order to do that, input is not taking the full width, so we'll add the full width attribute so that it is there in the taking the full space. We also have some extra spacing between, so to remove that we'll just add the padding. We will remove this. underline also. Let's inspect and see how this underline is coming. So it is coming from the input, and from that div outside that there is a multi-input underline class is there, and there is a before and after. So to the after there is a border bottom is added. So we can add some styles to remove that. Even for before the border bottom is added. So both before and after has the border. So ampersand again, current element, inside that whatever is this underline text field class, and to the after. So for that we will say border bottom is none. So we don't want to add any border bottom. Now the same thing for the before also. Now we have one more is on mouse hover also. The same effect is coming. So we need to find out to which elements hover it is actually taking, so that we can override that. Let's try to add the hover effect and see from where the style gets added. Applying the hover effect to this one, to this div, and now let's look at the before. So here on the hover, then this border bottom is getting added. So we can utilize the same. We'll just add the same selector so that it will get higher priority, and then we'll use the text class name. So the class name to override, if you look at the text field API, we can see that there is a multi text field root. This is the class name we need to use to override. And then we will use the for the before, and then we'll do the same thing. We'll remove the border bottom. Now let's try to see whether it's working or not. Okay, now still we can see there is one line coming. Again, if you look at this div, so we apply the hover, and if we add this one, before we already did, and border bottom none we added, but that didn't get the priority. So the specificity wise, it is still not on the top. So we'll use the underline class, because that is exact style which they used. Okay, now that when we use that class, that underline is gone. There's only that it's not aligning with the list items radio button that's facing on the left side. So we can just add some padding on the left side. So padding left PL, we'll add that, and then now it is aligned on the left side. We will add our custom icons. I already moved the icon images to the images folder. Now to add a custom icon, so it's very simple. We just so in the icons, if you look into that, there is an SVG icon option, so we can just use that. So we just have to say SVG icon, and then we can pass whatever is that file path. So we'll first import the SVG icon, and we'll add the SVG icon component, and we have to pass component is equal to whatever is the icon. And we'll have to import React component as, and then whatever is the icon name we can give. Now the icon is showing, but the bottom is a little bit of gone, so we may have to add some extra styling. So rather than adding the style then and there, because we may have to use this icon again some other place, what we'll do is we'll create a custom component, icon component, where we have all these stylings, so that the custom styling we don't have to repeat across the application. So we'll create custom component for each of the icon what we want to add. Very simple React component which internally will have the SVG icon component. And in this case we will import the moon icon, and we will add the styling so that the complete icon image is visible. We don't need any special props here. We just want to simply return an SVG icon, and then also from the index.ts we'll just export all these icon components which we are creating. We'll just follow the same file structure which we followed the other places. Okay, now that we have created this custom component, instead of the SVG icon we can use our custom component. Okay, now we have the icon showing up correctly, but we still haven't added the styles. So what we will do is we can add the SX again. We'll try to add some height so that it is visible. Now it is showing up fully. Similar way we can create the other icons also. Let's add our check icon in our home page for the to-dos. So this is the icon we want to show when the to do is completed. So we can make it as a conditionally we can display. So if it is already completed, then we'll display this icon. If not, then we'll just display the existing what we created, radio button with the list item text. So we can add a condition like if the to do is completed, then show the check icon. Else we'll add all this radio element. Now we don't have any completed ones, so let's make one to do as completed. We'll go to the file store. So now let's make one of these items, so which is the high, we'll make it as true. Now if you see, there is no radio button showing, that means it is showing up. So the SVG is there, that means our icon is there, but it's not showing up correctly. Why it's not showing up? Because by default the color is white, and so we will add some kind of background colors to make it correct, make it look correct. So in our background it's kind of a gradient, if you see. So now we can look at the style guide which is provided by the front-end vendor. Now in that there is a background given which is gradient from one shade to the another. We'll do the same thing. So we'll to our check icon, we'll add a style where we can add a background as this linear gradient. I'll just copy the same values. So linear gradient of, so this is the from to the to. So we have given us background. I think we can give it as background. Instead of background color, we'll give it as background. Now it is showing you there are two issues are there. One is it is showing a square, that is the default behavior. We'll add a border radius to make it round. We'll give a 90 pixel border radius so that it will be completely round. Now we need to also move this, the checkbox symbol, check symbol, to the center. Now since it is a path inside the SVG, we cannot move with the normal position absolute or something, we cannot move. Instead we can utilize the transform styling. So we can translate the path to the center. We can give some fixed styling and then we can add that. So to the path inside the SVG, we'll add transform translate, and then we can say that how much we want to move on the x-axis and the y-axis. So I think we moved a bit further. Let's play around in the elements panel and see. Okay, so the 8 pixel and 7. Okay, so that looks almost at the center. And we need a bit of a spacing also. This looks, the text is also aligned very much near to that. So we'll add some padding. It should be aligned with the radio button below. We can add a margin, and so MX is basically, so it will be on left and right, it will add some spacing. So instead of saying margin right and margin left, we can say with the one like MX. Same way for vertical it is MY. So now these two are aligned. So we are good with that. So our icons wise, we have added the theme switcher. For that we added the mode icon, and we added the checkbox also, checked item also. Next we need to add the delete button, delete icon for each to do item. We need to show that delete icon, and that should be on the rightmost side. So the text we want to show on the left side, and the icon button we want to show on the right side. Utilize grid component for the alignment. So we'll just add it inside a grid. We'll make it as a grid container. And we'll add the Todo item title and also our cross icon, which is basically the icon button with a cross icon. We want to show the button only on hover. So we'll add a class name to the button, and we will add a class name. So how do we hide is we'll use the visibility, because whenever it is hidden also we still want to keep it space so that there is no any jumbling, or it doesn't toggle, or the space is always there. So the UI will be always consistent. So now that it is working, only one mouse over, we are able to see the delete icon. Now we will add the theme switch functionality. So on click of this, we should be able to change to the dark mode, and again we should be able to come back also. And we will also want to persist the theme, so that even if I refresh, so I change the theme and then I refresh the page, I still want to see whatever I selected. How do we set only for our background image, how do we set that background image based on the theme? So what we will do is, and background image is on the top level. So what we can do is we can add a top level class to the body. If the class is there, we will add the dark theme. If not, we'll add the light theme. Let's add that styles. We'll go to the top level CSS file, which is index.css1. We already have added the styles for the light theme. That is the default one we are using, and that is we are added for mobile as well as for the desktop. Now we will say that if there is a class dark theme is there, then we will have a different background image. Now wherever we are setting the theme, we need to also make sure that we are adding or removing this class. All other places it is inside the React components, so we are using the theme provider already. So in our theme file, whenever we are setting that new theme, and the new theme we want to set is a dark one, we will add the class to the body. And we can add the class to the body using a direct API available in the browser, document.body.add class. Class list.add. And we'll give the dark theme as the class name. Now in the else scenario, if there is already a dark theme, so we'll just, to be safer, we'll just remove that class name. And the same thing we have to do when we refresh the page. When we are refreshing the page right now, we are just getting reading the red data from the session storage. Now we also have to make sure that when we first time loading the page, if the theme is already a dark theme, we need to apply this theme style also. Now in our header, we will just add a click handler to the button, so that whenever we click on that, we will just toggle the theme. So we'll call the set theme from the theme provider. We already have the theme provider, app theme provider, and we have the set theme method from that. So we'll call that and then we will set the theme. We will also change the theme icon based on the active theme. Whatever is the theme, so we'll do that also from the context, and we will set that icon accordingly. Now we are able to change the theme. Whenever we click on that, it's a dark theme, so it's shining that dark backgrounds and all. And overall it is changing that because we added the dark mode, palette mode as dark. It will also persist the theme in the page. So that means if I refresh the page, still it will persist the theme. Now we will make routing related changes. We want two changes to be made. One is on after login, we want to redirect to home page, and also on home page, if the user is not logged in, it should automatically redirect back to the login page. So to do these changes, so we can see it in the router. There are two options are there. Either we can redirect using a navigate component. So whenever that component is rendered, it will redirect, or we can use a hook. Use navigate, we can utilize that, gives a method, and utilizing that we can actually redirect. So in this login component, we'll use the use navigate. We could use any of that actually. So this use navigate when we are importing, and then we'll utilize that, and whenever we set the user, we'll call the set navigate. Actually, we should be calling it's not the set navigate. Use navigate is returning the navigate method. So we'll just get that navigate method, and then this navigate method we can use whenever we have the user available. Then we will redirect to the home page. Now as soon as we log in with Google, we are getting automatically redirected to the home page. Next thing we want to do is we want to make the routes check for the authentication. Not all authentication, only for the home page route, home page component. We don't want to render automatically. Instead, we want to render home page component only if the user is logged in. Otherwise, it should get automatically redirect back to the login page. So what we'll do is we'll create a new component which will basically check if the user is logged in or not. If it is logged in, it will just render whatever is the component. So we can make it as since it is only home page component, we could make it directly in the home page component itself. We could add this condition, but we can make it a generic also. That's what we are doing here. So we are creating a new component which is a very generic component, so that we can have the similar functionality for other routes also in the future. So what we are doing is, first we are reading from the context and trying to get the user. If user is available, that means user is logged in, then we will render the original one. Otherwise, if user is not available, we will navigate back to the, so we'll redirect basically. And it's the same thing what we were doing in the other ones. Like basically, we'll be just getting the children, whatever is children. So it's a very generic one. So it will be the type of prop React node, and then we'll be rendering that if everything is good. It's throwing error saying that the type is not correct. React node can be undefined also. Try using this protected route component. So instead of the original home page component, we will wrap this home page inside the protected route component, so that this check will be automatically done. Now the benefit is, since it is generic, we can do the same for any component where we want this check. Now this home page component is inside the protected route. Now let's see what is that. So we are getting the same error. Type undefined is not assignable. We will have to render this one. So I'll just put it inside a React fragment, and we'll just render that. Now if you go to the, so it automatically got redirected. We can try that again. So if I go to the localhost 3000, that has a user. Now I'll remove the user. Now if I refresh the page, okay, it is giving an error saying that maxima updated. That means it is trying to render again and again the same thing. So there is some issue in what we ordered. If you look at this one, let's look at the code. Okay, so the URL I have given is again slash. So I am redirecting back to the home page if the user is not logged in. Actually, we should redirect back to the login page if the user is not logged in. Okay, now we already got redirected to login page. Now we'll try to log in and see whether we are able to stay in the home page or we are able to redirect back to the home page if the user is logged in. So now we are able to redirect back to the home page if the user is logged in. Our layout is a little different between mobile and desktop. If you see, look at the footer. For a mobile layout, the filter buttons are in a separate box, completely separated. So there is a gap also between them. But if it is in the desktop design, everything is in the same way, like currently how we are. So we can look at the media query option. So basically the responsive UI options. There is a hook provided by MaterialUI, which will give us the current breakpoint. So we can check whether is it matching with our expected breakpoint or not. So utilizing that, we can check whether the current viewport, is it a mobile or not, mobile screen or not, based on whatever our expected breakpoint. So as per our style guide, we are expecting that anything above 375 is not a small screen. So we'll put a max width. We'll make it as 400, just a little bit of, or we can make it as exactly the same. We'll just give a small screen or something. So basically this boolean will become true if the query is matching. Now if it is matching, we'll create a new card only for the mobile screen. We'll just add a condition to check. If this condition is true, then render that new card. If not, then render the existing one. That's all. We also want to show different title for the pages. If it is a login page, we want to show login. If it is home page, we want to show to do. So for that, we'll use the use location hook from React Router, which will give us the current active URL, and based on that, we can change the title. Let's push our changes to the GitHub repo. So I'm just creating a repository, and we will just add the remote, and we can push the change there. I'll just add and commit. Now main is our major branch or main branch, and we push the changes. Now we don't want anyone to directly push to the main branch if there are multiple people working. What we want is, like, if there is a continuous deployment is set up, as soon as someone merges to the main, it will be hosted, right? So we want to avoid that anyone directly pushes, so we are adding the branch protection. Now we will try again. Now that I have set up the branch protection, we'll try to push the change again. I'll make some change, and then we'll try to commit directly to the master or main branch. Now when I am trying to push, I'm getting an error saying that it is restricted. Now what we can do is, in a normal flow, is we'll create a feature branch out of the main branch, and we'll create a pull request. Now the pull request, again, we have added the restriction in our branch protection, saying that at least it needs one approval before it can be merged. But right now, just to show you that to merge that, I'll just disable that for now, so that I can show you the merging of the PR also. So now I can merge it. I can squash and merge, or I can just do a normal merge also. Deploy our application to Firebase using the Firebase CLI. We can install the Firebase CLI using the npm. There are multiple options are there. With npm, we can install using the sudo npm install -g. So I've already installed this in my system. So once you install, the Firebase command will be available in the command prompt. First step is Firebase login. Now I have just logged in. So basically, it will just ask you to log in with that Google login, whatever login we enable the Firebase. Now we look at the current projects. Now you can see that the project we created is listed here, which is the React Firebase Todo. So that means we are logged into the correct account. Now to initialize the Firebase in our project, we'll do a Firebase init. At that time, we will ask what options or what features of Firebase we want to initialize. We are interested in only the hosting. So we'll select that, and also we'll select also the GitHub Action along with that. What is GitHub Action will do is, it will basically create a workflow which will do the continuous deployment. Now we can mention that once we build our application, it will be in the build folder. So we'll mention that, and it's our single page application, so it's yes. And once all this login is there, then so now we are connecting the Firebase with the GitHub, so that the GitHub can add this enable this automatic deployment. So it will add the keys and it will enable that. So now I logged in. Now we'll give this repository, to which repository we want this to be added. So it creates service account, it will add that. Now it is asking for the workflow. So this is where the GitHub actions will be generated. All the GitHub actions will be added under .github folder. Now we'll try to publish. Now I did a build. Once you do the build, we'll do the Firebase deploy. So once you do the build, it will generate a build folder with all our ReactJS. Everything is compiled to a normal JavaScript, and everything is now compiled, so that the browser can directly understand these files now. Now with these files available, we'll do the deploy. Once it is deployed, you can see there is a URL available. So this is the dashboard of that hosting, and we can see that the whole page hosted, which you can see with that URL. We can see that our application is loading up fine, and our whole functionalities are also working fine. We need to check out whether our GitHub Actions we created, is it working fine or not. So Firebase generated two files under the workflow. One is for deploying. So when we merge something to the master main branch, when we push something to the main branch, it will deploy that to the Firebase. Another one is when it will run whenever there is a pull request created. At that time, it will build it, and it will create a preview URL also. So this is available so that we can make sure that no one is breaking the application. Now we'll just try this flow. I just made a small change. Now we'll push this change. So now all these workflows created are not yet there in the remote. So we'll try to push that first. And this we will push to the main branch itself. Why? Because this is the first time we are adding these workflows. Only once it is run first time, then only this is available. The GitHub is recognizing that. Temporarily disable the branch protection, because we just want this to be only the workflows we want to push to the main branch itself. Then onwards, we can make sure that this protection is being set up correctly. I'll just change the branch name to something else so that it is not impacted to the main branch. Now we'll push this changes. It seems whatever we merged earlier, so it is my local is not up to date. So I'll just take the latest and then push again. Now the main has the latest, and since it has a workflow, it even started the GitHub action. So the first GitHub action we have added is whenever someone pushes a change to the main branch, it will trigger a build and deploy workflow action. It is generating. What it is doing, it is installing the dependencies and then doing a build. If it is successful, then it will do the deploy to the Firebase also. Now we can also add one thing is, we can make sure that, so now we can put it back that protection. We can also add that every pull request which is creating, we are saying that pull request is required. Now every pull request should pass the workflow we created, but it is not showing up here because that workflow has not yet run at least one time. So it has to run at least one time before we can use that. So what we'll do is, we'll create a pull request so that the workflow is initialized. After that, GitHub will be able to recognize that. Now I created a new branch. Now once we create the pull request, here it is showing I can able to merge it because there is no conflict. But now it also started the check. This is the different one. This is actually the build and preview hook. So build and preview action, it is started. It will do the same thing. It will do the CI, which is installing the dependencies, and then it will do the build. After that, it will create a preview URL, not the real one. Instead, it won't deploy to the main Firebase application. It will just create a preview one. Now this build, it is completed, but it failed. So the build and deploy, the check is now failing. Because of that, so overall GitHub action is failing now. Now if this check is failing, ideally our PR, we should not be able to merge, because since it fails, so you should not really allow. That means there is some mistake is there, so we need to first fix that. So let's see whether our pull request is now not able to merge or not. If I look at the PM, it is still, I can merge it. Why? Because we couldn't select last time the status check, which status check to be completed. That we couldn't check later. Now since it has run at least one time, GitHub will be able to identify that. Now if I search for build, you can see that now it is coming, both the actions are showing up here. So we'll select the build and preview. Now what we are saying is build and preview has to be successfully completed, then only we can merge the PR. Now if we look back at the pull request, we cannot merge it now. The merge button is disabled because the PR check has to be successful. We'll check out that branch and we'll try to run and see what is the error coming. When we build locally, we'll see these are the errors which is coming. What I will do is I will just try to fix these issues. Now that the checks are passing, you can see that now all the PR shows we can merge it. It also added a comment which is a preview URL. If you open this page, now we can see our new change. we removed the footer. Now you can see that footer is not there. But if you look at the original application, the main application, still the footer is there. So the changes are not yet there. So this preview URL is just a temporary one. It is live for only few days. After that, that URL will be deprecated. Now once we merge it, it will be merged to the main branch, and once it is merged to the main branch, the new action will be triggered, which is the build and deploy action, and which will deploy the merged changes or the latest changes to the Firebase. So we'll be getting the latest changes. So here now a continuous deployment flow is created, so that as soon as some changes are merged to the main branch, then all the changes will be immediately available in the Firebase also. Finally, let's add some unit test cases also. Create React App automatically adds one test case, which is in app.test. It's adding. It's using Just and React testing library. Just the testing framework and React testing library is the rendering one, where we can add all our test scenarios we can add. Testing library, it's a very preferred way of testing React applications right now. It gives a very minimal number of selectors. The other alternative is the enzyme. I will run the test. It will run in a watch mode. There is only one test case right now, and it is failing right now. Now the one major issue with this one is the top level component in our React application is a router, but in our test case, for it to render, it is not understanding any of the router options. So what we will do is, we will create a dummy router. We will wrap it inside a router provider, so that the current app component will be aware of the routing. So we'll create a top level, same like how we created in the application. We'll create a top level router provider with all the routes. We just want to add only one route, which is for the app component. The component is rendering correctly, so that we can see that all the HTML being rendered. Now the error we are getting is a valid one, because we are looking for a element with the text length React. We don't have anything like that. What we have is, instead we have a login text is there, to do text is there. So maybe we can test for any of that. We can check maybe there is a element with the text login is available or not. So which is passing, because as we know that there is a login is available. We can also see the HTML by using the screen.debug. If you want to see final what is the HTML being rendered, so we can look at this using the debug, and based on that we can add some test case also. case we need to listen for the key press event. React testing library provides different format to listen for the test for the events. So we can use fire event, or we can use the user actions, we can use. So we can listen, so we need to get the element and then we can utilize this fire event method or the user event method. Now the key press is happening and add-doc is also getting triggered. Since add-doc is getting triggered, but we haven't initialized any Firebase in our test setup, so it's basically will fail. And we are not really interested to make the real call also. Instead, we just want to know whether the add-doc is called with the correct data or not. We should not make a real call because it is a dependency. What we will do is, we will mock this add-doc or any other Firebase method which this component is using, so that we can check whether this function is being called with the expected arguments or not. But we will not really call that as well. So we'll use the just.mock, and then we can since it is a mock, we can say that what it is expected to give. So here we are not really interested in any response also from the add-on. So we'll just simply return a just function. This mock return, mock implementation, all those different options are available. We'll just do a mock implementation where we'll just say it's a just function. That means it is a dummy function where we can spy on that or we can listen for that. Now we can check that when user is typing and pressing enter, this add doc is getting called. So we can say to have been called since it is a mock. So we are checking whether it is getting called or not, which is success. Now we can also check whether it is being called with this particular values or not. What we are expecting is, since we are passing a to do, we are adding a text with we are entering hello and then pressing enter. So it should have been called with the title hello. Now in the first argument which is passed to the add doc is the DB. We are not really interested in the first argument what we are passing, because that's a Firebase data. I mean, we can check that also. In our case, we are not really interested. So we'll just put an expected is. It can be any value. We are not interested. But we are expecting the second argument. What we are passing is an object which is to be inserted. So there we are expecting that whatever I typed, is that the same thing being passed? So three options are there, user ID, and so the user ID can be. So from the use context, so it will get the user, and then if it is not there, that it will be undefined. So I'll put the same thing. So since we haven't set any user context, it can be undefined. Now we are getting the error saying that the value is not correct. It is saying that it's expecting a function of any, but it got undefined. This Firebase is not initialized. The DB seems to be coming as undefined. So what we'll do is we'll just put this itself instead of any, we can just say undefined. Now if you test the application, test case, it seems to be working. So we are able to check whether the add doc has been called with the expected arguments or not. Similar way, we can add the test case for every component. With that, we complete our application and this video. We used ReactJS, MaterialUI, Firebase, Github Action, and also we did unit testing, ESLint configuration, Prettier, etc. Hope this was a useful video. Thanks for watching.